Ever since all this AI stuff started, there's been a ton of paranoia about how much data these companies have about you. On one hand, I think people are too paranoid, but on the other, I understand. These things have so much information, and the more they know about you, the creepier it gets. Sadly, there has been a change that makes this much scarier. OpenAI is now forced to keep all of the data that you put into it. If you delete a chat, it's still in their logs. And it sucks that that's the case because they don't even want to do this. They've been forced by a court order due to a lawsuit they're going through with New York Times to maintain all data from all users doing chats inside of the OpenAI ecosystem. As they call out here, OpenAI is now directed to preserve and segregate all output log data that would otherwise be deleted on a going forward basis until further order of the court. That is terrifying. The fact that the courts in a case like this will make us as individuals less safe is terrifying. But OpenAI has responded, and as such, we have a ton to talk about. None of these companies are paying me, and I want to make sure I can come in here as unbiased as possible, so we'll do a quick word from today's unrelated sponsor and then dive into the details. Be right back. I feel like the work I do could be split into two different buckets. Things that need a lot of really deep thought in order to get them right, and then things that just need to be done. As such, my team can kind of be split the same way, where there are the people who come in and make everything perfect first try, and the ones who do the rest of the work. The problem is, how do you find people who are good enough to do that first half? And do you need to pay them full-time salaries forever indefinitely in order to keep them around? What if your team was dynamic enough that it could scale up and down in size and in skill based on what you're working on at any given time? You would need a really good way to hire those people and manage them all. And that's what today's sponsor is here to help with. G2I is the only company that can help you flex your staff up and down based on your specific needs at any given time. Do you need a pile of full-timers to maintain your project indefinitely? They can help you hire really good people really quick. Do you need a small group of 2 to 3 mobile experts to lay the foundation for a new app you're building? They can help you hire a couple people for just 8 to 10 weeks, get you going, and then you can finish it up yourself from there. Whatever your team needs, there's a very good chance G2I can help you hire the right amount of people for the right amount of time to get it just right. And these aren't just random people either. There are over 8,000 engineers, many of which have a traditional FANG background, working at giant companies like Amazon, Netflix, Google, and more. And you know they'll be good because they give you a detailed breakdown of each candidate's history, as well as asking them questions that you send to them in a video form so you can actually see who they are and if you vibe with them or not. It makes a ton of sense, especially in this AI-generated world where everybody's sending slop around as their interviews. It's really cool to see. The timeline these guys work on is insane. From the first interview being done to the first person committing code into your code base is literally under a week sometimes, and it's consistently this fast. It's absurd. Recruiters don't work this fast, G2I does. If you're ready to hire great engineers, hit them up today at soydev.link/G2I. So as previously mentioned, OpenAI is going through this lawsuit with New York Times about copyright stuff. And the court rulings has now forced them to have all of this data that they don't want to have. The best way to keep your users' data safe is to get rid of the user data, not having it at all. But sadly, they have to. So what are they going to do about this? What's their plan? Trust and privacy are at the core of OpenAI's products. We give you tools to control your data, including easy opt-outs and permanent removal of deleted ChatGPT chats and API content from OpenAI systems within 30 days. The New York Times and other plaintiffs have made a sweeping and unnecessary demand in their baseless lawsuit against us. Retain consumer ChatGPT and API customer data indefinitely. This is kind of insane if you think about it. The fact that in a lawsuit between businesses, actions can be taken that are almost 100% harmful towards the users, especially the fact that they're not allowed to anonymize the data that they're keeping once it's deleted. Like, this would be one thing if a user deletes a thread and they keep track of an anonymized version as data to be used in the court case. But it's very different from they are forced to keep and segregate all of the identifiable data throughout. Because believe it or not, OpenAI doesn't want to know all of this stuff about you. They might want your data, but not because it's yours and because they can track you better or something like the way Google does. They just want the data itself, specifically the things that worked and didn't work for you. So if you put in some context, you get an answer, and then you give it the thumbs up that you liked it or thumbs down, or you re-roll when you didn't. That's the data that they want. And they don't want this to know you better. They want this so they can train their models better and make things smarter. They don't want to improve based on your needs. They want to improve the models based on everyone's needs. And as such, the chat data when you're using the general ChatGPT experience is used to make the models better, especially when you hit that thumbs up and thumbs down button. That's the data that they keep. They have no interest in it being personal. Now they have to keep track of who the data came from, and they didn't before. This also sucks really hard when you consider the fact that OpenAI is not the only place that you could hit OpenAI models. You can also do them through Azure, which means I, as a person that wants to use these things for private use cases and business stuff, or worse, if I'm providing something like T3 chat to a business that is using our service internally, if I want to provide them a safe, secure, and private experience on OpenAI's models, I have to do it on Azure instead now. Because if I do it with OpenAI, they are being forced by the courts to maintain that data. This gives a huge advantage to third parties over OpenAI because OpenAI is the one that has to keep the data and they have to keep all of the data. So if you're signed into chatgpt.com and you send a message, that is now logged as from you with your email address. If you log into T3 chat and send a message to an OpenAI model on OpenAI's platform, it still has to keep track of the message, but it no longer knows who it came from. Instead, it sees it came from T3 chat. So you get one level of benefit there where the data is no longer associated with you if you use a third party. But if you do it through Azure, where it's entirely different infra, you have nothing to worry about. And with T3 Chat, all of the GPT-4 models, like 4.0 and 4.1, those are hosted on Azure for us because it was faster and we have a bunch of credit with them, I'll be real. It makes more sense for us to move the other models over for privacy reasons now, which is kind of crazy that we benefit as a company moving to the third-party hosting over OpenAI's, and you benefit as a user using our interface or using Azure instead of using OpenAI's. This is a massive detriment to their business, as well as a massive detriment to the average consumer that is just using the app to get some information about whatever. It just sucks to see someone who's trying to do the right thing with user data and privacy get screwed by the courts for it. As they say, this fundamentally conflicts with the privacy commitments that we have made to our users. It abandons long-standing privacy norms and it weakens privacy protections. We strongly believe this is an overreach by the New York Times. We're continuing to appeal this order so we can keep putting your trust and privacy first. I won't go as far as they do saying the lawsuit is baseless. We do need to have a conversation about how AI models are using generally available data to generate things. Like, what is the line for plagiarism? In many ways, the model is using the original work in a more dynamic way than a human would, where if I read 3 sources and write my own article, more of the original will make it through than if I train a model with those 3 articles and then write a 4th one, if they're just stuffed in alongside all of the other context. But it also feels much worse because it's an AI doing it, not a human doing it. This is, and as silly as it is to say, like, the feeling matters, it does. The Supreme Court has historically had the you know it when you see it way of doing things for extreme cases, and I think this fits there. It does feel fundamentally different to have an AI spit out an article referencing 3 other articles versus having a human doing it. Is it infringement in either case? Is it infringement in both cases? Where does copyright fall here? That's an interesting question, and I do think this case should be seen through to figure out where it stands. I just don't think users should be hurt in the interim, and that's what I hate about this, is New York Times' willingness to fuck over hundreds of millions of people and their privacy in order to have a potential slight edge in this case. That sucks. If they have a strong case, they should be able to prove it with or without 100% of OpenAI's data. You should not need all of that to do this. Funny enough, I have similar critiques with Anthropic because they just cut off Windsurf, the IDE, from having direct access to their models on their platform. I think that's just stupid because now they can go to third parties and get the exact same thing they were. It's just an optics L. It's weird that OpenAI now has a similar, like, incentivizing people to leave their platform, but instead of doing it themselves as a stupid self-own, it's being forced upon them via the New York Times lawsuit. It's a very weird case. Before we get into the Q&A, you guys know me, I'm an opportunist. If New York Times is going to make it this much worse to use the OpenAI website, I'm going to make it a little better to use ours. If you haven't signed up for the $8 a month T3 chat yet, use code THANKS-NYT when you check out, and your first month will be $1 instead of $8, only for new subs. That will give you access to literally every model you would ever want to use, including O3 now that the price is reasonable. You can also use O3 Pro and Claude 4 Opus with Bring Your Own Key, and literally everything else within hours of it dropping whenever it drops. Anyways, let's see their answers to these common questions. Why are the New York Times and other plaintiffs asking for this? The New York Times is suing OpenAI. As part of their baseless lawsuit, again, their words, not mine, they've recently asked the court to force us to retain all user content indefinitely going forward, based on speculation that they might find something that supports their case. We strongly believe that this is an overreach. It risks your privacy without actually helping resolve the lawsuit. That's why we're fighting it. I will also say it feels kind of weird that New York Times is forcing OpenAI to keep all data and then expects to be able to go through it because they're a journalist. I don't want any journalists having access to my entire history in my AI chat apps. I don't want even you guys knowing the things I talk about. We're working on some features to make it easier to hide chats so that I don't have to worry about what I'm talking about in T3 chat. I don't want New York Times having access to my chat history. Having access to everybody's is terrifying. If this was like some individual author or something, that'd be interesting. But the fact that it is reporters, you could even make the argument that they're doing this so they can access the chat histories of people they don't like in order to do sketchy things with that. I'm not an anti-journalist person. I'm very, very pro finding some way to make sure the journalistic space can continue to exist, thrive, and make money. I support a ton of friends in journalism. I'm still really close with my homies at The Verge and whatnot. This sketches me out. Next question. Is my data impacted? Yes. If you have a ChatGPT Free, Plus, Pro, and Team subscription, or if you use the OpenAI API, without a zero data retention agreement. Apparently, they're still honoring those, which is good. But if you're just using the API directly without setting that all up, might have to worry about your data now. Apparently, ChatGPT Enterprise and ChatGPT Educational customers are also outside of it. Let me go see if we have ZDR set up. Seems like getting into zero data retention requires a crazy separate approval process. And since our API's experience, like the thing that we're providing, is directly user facing, we probably can't get around the abuse monitoring stuff. So sadly, when we're using the OpenAI endpoints, I don't think we can set up ZDR. That said, we're already on the Azure ones for ChatGPT 4.1 and 4.0. This might accelerate our move for the O models to be moved over. Check out my Twitter for more information if you want to keep up with that. I will do my best to get us moved over as soon as is reasonable, as long as it doesn't hurt the user experience, because the Azure endpoints are faster for the 4 models, but they're not faster. They're actually quite a bit slower for the reasoning models. Finding the right balance there is tough. According to other people in my chat, getting into ZDR with OpenAI is actually quite a challenging process. Makes sense. Oh yeah, our image gen is also on the OpenAI endpoints because the Azure ones didn't exist when we set it up, and they're usually really out of date, if they even exist right now. I'd be surprised if they did, honestly. Anyways, as such, your chat messages with OpenAI models on T3 chat for the O models and for image gen, by necessity of this lawsuit, those are being logged by OpenAI, not with your information. They have no idea who sent it, but they know that it was sent and they have that history. Sadly, there is nothing we can do about that other than move off of OpenAI, which for many reasons I kind of want to do, mostly just to get the extra credits that we have with Azure burned through. But yeah, this sucks. This really sucks. Thankfully, you're not identifiable when you do it on T3 chat versus when you do it on OpenAI site. So there is still a benefit, and it's not just that we cost less than half as much. It's weird because like I do enjoy the OpenAI guys. I've had awesome conversations with them. They've been one of the best like LM partners to work with, as crazy as that sounds. I don't like them getting fucked over like this and none of the others. Like this lawsuit could just as easily have been at Google or at Anthropic, and it would hurt them all the exact same way. It's also a good point from chat that this violates GDPR, but it's not a court case in the EU. It's a court case in the US. So it's just, yeah, this just sucks. So what have they done to challenge it? From the outset, they argued that the plaintiff's request to preserve all output data was vastly overbroad and conflicted with our privacy commitments. We filed a motion asking the magistrate judge to reconsider the preservation order, highlighting the indefinite retention of user data breaches industry norms and our own policies. And as I mentioned from this document before, the judge overruled it and said that despite their protests, they are now directed to preserve and segregate all of this data. If I delete my data from ChatGPT, will it still be retained under this order? The New York Times is demanding that we retain even deleted ChatGPT chats and API content that would typically be automatically removed from our systems within 30 days. How will you store my data and who can access it? The content covered by the court order is stored separately in a secure system, is protected under legal hold, meaning it can't be accessed or used for purposes other than meeting legal obligations. Only a small, audited OpenAI legal and security team would be able to access this data as necessary to comply with our legal obligations. So this isn't the usual startup where they can just go open the dashboard or the database and look at all of everyone's data. It's a whole separate, isolated thing. It's one of the benefits of OpenAI having as much fucking money as they do is they can spin up a team and hire 5 people to literally just do this and work on this fucking lawsuit. It's crazy that they have to, but at the very least, they can isolate this from the rest of the company such that you don't have to worry about a random employee reading one of your threads that you deleted. But it does mean that the government and that New York Times will eventually have access to this giant vault of data. Will the data be shared with New York Times, other plaintiffs, or anyone else? The data is not automatically shared with the New York Times or anyone else. It's locked under a separate legal hold, so it's securely stored and can only be accessed under strict legal protocols. If the plaintiffs continue to push for access in any way, we will fight to protect your privacy at every step. This is corpo speak for they can't access without going through the court, but with that, they can get whatever. We will fight to try and prevent it to the best of our ability, but we honestly have no idea. That's what this sentence says. I really hate this. I do genuinely really hate this. How long do they have to keep the data? Is there a known end date or review period? Right now, the court order forces us to retain consumer ChatGPT and API content going forward. That said, we're actively challenging the order. This is them saying, right now, we have to forever, but we're hoping to get this changed. Does this court order violate GDPR or my rights under European and other privacy laws, including California's privacy laws? It certainly is. We are taking steps to comply at this time because we must follow the law, but the New York Times demand does not align with our privacy standards. That's why we're challenging it. That demand also doesn't align with GDPR laws. Does this change your training policies? Nope. Will you keep us updated? Yep. And then a breakdown of those retention policies. On Free Plus and Pro, like going to chatgpt.com and sending messages as a normal consumer, when you delete a chat or your account, the chat's removed from your account immediately and scheduled for permanent deletion from OpenAI systems within 30 days, unless we're required to retain it for legal or security reasons. With the team product, each user controls whether their conversations are retained. Deleted or unsafe conversations are deleted within 30 days unless they're required to retain them, which they are now. Enterprise and education, workspace admins are the ones who have the control. So they have much more control there, thankfully. API, business customers who build on top of the API control how long customer content is retained, but this case makes that sketchy. Zero data retention API, if a business customer is using that, inputs and outputs are never logged and not retained for application state at all. So even with the court orders, zero data retention, it doesn't exist. Cool. Yeah, this kind of just sucks. Like, normally I have more to say and more input on these things, but I don't have much here. I hate that it almost feels like New York Times is trying to make ChatGPT users feel bad and less likely to use it in order to better their grudge against them. Apparently, the judge in this case who decided it was okay for all of OpenAI's data to be stored indefinitely and for all of your data to be stored as such too, they're up for reappointment in March this coming year. And there is a open call for comments from members of the bar and the public as to whether or not they think this judge should be recommended to be reappointed. So if you're like me, might be worth taking the time to do this. I will leave this link in the description if you want the necessary data in order to reach out. I think if you're the type of person who cares and you live in New York, this is worthwhile. I lived in New York for a long time. I'm going to send one of these and see what they do with it. I don't like the idea that a journalist or a news organization can make people less safe. I really hate that. I feel similarly to this as to how I felt about people being mad at Anthropic for disclosing the snitching behavior of the new models. It feels like these companies, these individuals, these bad faith actors are willing to hurt the safety and privacy of individuals to reach their goals. And I never like that. It is incredibly frustrating to see when people are willing to hurt third parties that have nothing to do with the situation in order to achieve their goals. I can't believe that in journalist versus billion-dollar AI company, I am siding with the billion-dollar AI company, but I absolutely am here. This is absurd. Even if the lawsuit is valid, and even if there are real copyright things to discuss here, hurting end users in the process is never the solution to these things, and it makes it harder to approach the way New York Times is doing things in good faith. I'm curious how y'all feel, though. Am I being way too defensive of the billion-dollar business, or is this a real thing that we should be concerned about? I would hate it just as much if they did it to Apple. In fact, I commented on it a lot when something similar happened in the UK. I don't like this type of interference making us less safe. Curious how y'all feel, though. Let me know in the comments, and until next time, keep your data safe.